Thank you, Sydney. So firstly, let me add my welcome to that of Sydney's. You know, so many of my sort of friends and colleagues here from the last 5 or so years. It seems a long time since Sydney came over to the University of Hertfordshire for our first Deep Impact conference, on which this series was, as he said, originally based. A lot happened in the meantime. So these days I'm host of ICO Radio, you see on the left there, and we'll talk a bit about a sneak peek we're going to give you at the token intelligence platform, which is the exciting development that you're going to get to use today. But part of my job, apart from the unenviable task, frankly unenviable task of keeping time, so we're running about half an hour late at the moment, and we're all very relaxed, and that's good. I'm going to stay relaxed, so we may shave lunchtime a bit, but we'll see how we go through the morning. But the more enviable part of my task is if we can. Oh, I've got a clicker here somewhere, haven't I? Unless someone stole it. Is it working? The more enviable part of my task is to help set the scene. And do you know what? This is just as an exciting time, if not more so, than going back 5 years then. You know, this is a slide from way back, because we're entering the era of the digital token. And I believe this is a really important historical change, historical swing brought about by a change in the environment in which we all live. So, as you know, things have changed radically. We live in a different environment because of the internet, and that's going to change again. And we're headed towards a new kind of frictionless economy based on an internet of value. That's incredibly exciting. And no one, not even the folks who live here at the Bank of England, with whom I am privileged to, they buy me lunch now and again, actually, I'm privileged to talk to from time to time, can stop that. Not the SEC, not the Fed. This is global, and the genie is well and truly out of the bottle, for good or ill. And it was Buckminster Fuller who said that it's up to us to be the makers of our future, not its victims. And this change is coming. It's going to happen. It's going to happen in business sector after business sector after business sector. It's now beyond doubt. So, it's interesting to look at that timeline, isn't it? And the way that if the one underneath there has shrunk. So, the internet was invented in the 1970s, but it didn't really take off until the dawn of the web in the late 90s. Took nearly 30 years. It's taken almost 20 years for the next stage there, where we've got the internet as as ubiquitous. It's given us the internet as we know it, onto which is being grafted, and I choose the word carefully, and grafted with difficulty, the ability to transact. But that ability to transact right now still is based on offline institutions. And that's going to change. So I think as innovators, we're fortunate to be at the dawn of the next stage of that evolution, and it's going to have yet greater impact, if that's imaginable. Yeah, difficult to imagine. And if you think that Bitcoin, if you think of Bitcoin and you doubt that, and you think it might go away, or you think, as Mark Carney talked about the faults of the Ford Model T of cryptocurrencies, which is what Bitcoin effectively is. And that gives you doubt. Well, actually, forget Bitcoin and think about blockchain. Because Bitcoin is controversial, blockchain isn't. Bitcoin may be controversial, but blockchain isn't. The fact is that around the world, banks, financial institutions, and governments and regulators are working to get their head around, to adapt and adopt this stuff. There is no doubt that this is a really important major innovation which will change our environment, and it will change it radically. It will change what it means to be Darwinianly fit as a business or a business sector. And decentralization is clearly an important part of that. And if you've read some of my recent writings, I write for Real Business, as well as crowdfunding side of the editor, my editor. For that will be Andrew Dix, will be here later on today, so I'll have to watch my P's and Q's later. But you'll know that I was very critical of Mark Carney's recent speech. It just doesn't hold water as a treatise either about money or about the future. And what it does do is take a central bank's view of what they'd like the future to be. But the truth is, the future is different to the past. These guys have lived in a world of zero competition for a very long time. And in the future, and now already, they have something else to live up to. They have competition. So the token era will not simply accelerate what we've already seen, but it's going to bring a whole new kind of network economy in addition to and on top of what we've seen. And it's strange, isn't it, that one of the biggest debates we have around this is around regulation. But it's yet to dawn on most people, and certainly on most regulators, if not all regulators, that blockchain is a tremendous opportunity to regulate smarter and better. Okay, one of the biggest lessons we've learned through the last 5 years of crowdfunding, the thing that people would habitually say to me, they'd shake my hand and the first thing they would say to me is crowdfunding, well, it'll soon be rife with fraud. Yeah, and it isn't. And there's a reason that it isn't. And we know what the reason is. And it's been researched, and the research is available. It's been presented to the SEC, for example. And the reason is transparency. It's the combination of identity with transparency, which is actually more powerful than threats and hazards such as prison. Academically, the work's been done. And so we know that that's working. Combining that, even in the big, super grown-up world, if you like, of towers like this one and corporates and so on, with blockchain is a huge opportunity to do regulation smarter as well as better. So we've learned a lot, and we can combine that. And, part of that learning was it this very room? It was a room on level 39 where, in response to some of the work that we did in that intervening period, in those first 2 or 3 years, where, we thought and we knew that we could have regulation without strangling innovation. And this was the point at which there was a turning point for the UK, and I hope will precipitate. There's some of this happening, but more will happen. A turning point for the world, because this was the point at which George Osborne stood in this building and said, from now on, regulation must support innovation. Okay, and what we have now is, as a huge opportunity for that. A regulator classically is mechanism like this, which is built into the machine to stop it spinning out of control and causing damage to people and itself. Regulators aren't like that. They're like this. They're trying to catch a speeding train. It's always the way. A good friend of ours, Simon Brickles, I was chatting to him about this a little while ago, and he said through history it's always been the same. You know, it's inevitably reactive. Well, we actually now have a whole set of blockchain tools, a whole new environment where we can combine the ultimate in tamper-proof, the ultimate in verifiable and re-verifiable by anyone at any time with transparency. The cost of the Dodd-Frank Act so far, according to a figure I saw last week, just that one thing, 32 billion. Yeah. So no one knows the figure, because I've been looking for it for a long time, of the hard cost of regulation. You know, even accepting that it's absolutely necessary in its current form or not, you know, that has a big cost to us, right? Being able to do the same things safely could make a huge difference to that. And on top of that, the biggest cost of dumb regulation is the lost opportunities, the roads not travelled. And certainly no one knows the value of that. It certainly runs into the hundreds of billions and probably the trillions. So, you know, that equation, by adding identity and transparency to blockchain, can bring the ultimate in accountability, a gift to regulators. Because we're combining, as I've said, the tamper-proof and the immutability to make things verifiable. And ultimately, a new and higher level of safety and regulation than has ever been before attainable, I believe. I know there's a vision at the Bank of England, not unlike this, and has been for a number of years, of, you know, in a digital world, being able to see what's going on and be on top of things. I believe that vision's now moving on, you know, but can you imagine a new role for an organisation like the Bank of England and its peers around the world, where they're able in real time to have the right data feeds, access to the right blockchains, and be able to centralise and make that information available to the people who need it for the good of the economy and the common good via APIs. How powerful could that be? And that's a vision I know is out there. So before we move on to some of the exciting talks in the rest of the programme, and the first one is particularly exciting. Oh yeah, I just want to allude to this. This is the paper I mentioned before, where Douglas Cummings from Toronto, the university there in Toronto, has done the work on transparency. But finally, it's, you know, Mark Carney, Bank of England again, who 2-3 weeks ago was saying it's time for cryptocurrencies, or crypto assets as he wanted to term them, to join the mainstream, and it is. It's a really important moment in history, and that was kind of lost in a lot of the other noise about the Ford Model T. But it's also time for the thing to happen again that happened last time, for the mainstream to adapt and adopt this new technology, this blockchain technology, and you know, for that to become part and parcel of the mainstream, and that includes regulation. So finally, well, I mentioned this before, we're doing